Bueno, pues seguimos en Citea. Como se introducía al comienzo de la mañana, vamos a empezar a hablar con diversas empresas y organizaciones especializadas en el desarrollo de herramientas para intervención psicoeducativa o socioeducativa. Concretamente, ahora es el caso de Ohad Lavi, que es el CEO de Neurotech Solutions, una empresa que entre otras actividades tiene herramientas orientadas a detectar dificultades del aprendizaje o diagnosticar TDAH. Ohad, good morning. How are you? Can you hear me?
Yes, good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's very exciting. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being here. Now it's all yours.
Thank you very much. I'll start by saying that I'm speaking currently from Israel. So if there is a missile attack, unfortunately, I will have to stop the transmission and go into the security room. As you know, things are currently there's a lot of problems now in Israel. Let's say it like that. So just a FYI that this could occur. I'm going to share the presentation. Okay, so first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Ohad Lavi. I'm the CEO of Neurotech Solutions. And I come from a background of life science, business development, and psychology. Also in family, I have an MA in family psychology as well. And I'd like to talk to you about Neurotech today and about MOXO in particular. Neurotech has been around since 2008. We are specializing in the field of attention. This is our sole purpose of existence. Not only pathological attention, but also the full range of attention, which I will explain about in a minute. But I always like to start with this slide, because this is really the reason why we wake up in the morning and come to work. And that's our passion. First of all, we want to be the leaders in understanding how we can help eliminate undiagnosed ADHD, and to help every person with ADHD fulfill their quality of life and fulfill their potential. And that's our passion. That's why we do what we do. And why is it so important to get to an early diagnosis of ADHD? As you know, it's very easy to get a negative point in life if you have ADHD. Research is showing that around 40 to 60% of prisoners have ADHD. And there is a study that was published in Denmark in 2015 about a fourfold chance of death from accidents and substance abuse for people diagnosed after the age of 18. But on the flip side, there are some positive aspects to ADHD. And there are some very famous people with ADHD who've made it very well for themselves in life despite having ADHD, like, for example, JFK, like Adam Levine, the singer, like Michael Phelps, the swimmer. Even Albert Einstein is considered to have had ADHD. So the real question becomes, how can we help children with ADHD move from a negative life trajectory into a positive life trajectory? And we believe the answer to that is by getting to them early on in life with early diagnosis, early screening, and early intervention. So we try to build an ecosystem around that, starting with screening, moving into diagnosis, and eventually treatment. The screening element will be discussed later in a different presentation, but we basically go into schools. We try to create a general screening for the entire children population, highlighting children who have difficulties in an objective way, and giving them tips and tricks in a way, all drafted by experts in the field on how to utilize their special attention profile for their benefit. So how can we help them perform better? Those children that come abnormal in the screening tests will go for a clinical test called MOXO, which I will explain to in a minute, which is a decision assistant tool for the diagnosis of ADHD. And those who are abnormal in MOXO, and of course all the other battery of tests for ADHD, we have a solution for them that is non-medicinal with the assistance of other companies in Israel that help to train cognitive aspects of attention. And we call that Attention Dojo. But today I'm going to talk to you about MOXO, our clinical tool for the diagnosis of ADHD. And I don't know if you know, but those of you who've heard about MOXO, it's actually, the name actually comes from Japanese word. One of our early founders was from the world of karate. And MOXO, not necessarily pronounced that way, is a moment of clarity, which is the meditation a warrior does before he enters the ring. And we thought it was very appropriate for our product that speaks about attention. And basically, MOXO uses the same paradigm of many other CPTs of a go, no-go task. You see here on the left the TOVA test, which you have to react to the black square when it's in the bottom and not when it's on the upper side of the white square. A go, no-go, classic. And CPT3, which again, you have to react now to letters. So we use the same paradigm this way in MOXO as well, but we did it differently, which I'll show you in a second. The task in the MOXO is quite simple. We have two versions, the kids version and the adult version. In the kids version, you have to react to this face here of a child we call hyper. You have to react to it by pressing the space bar once as fast as possible. And you need to ignore other non-target elements like this duck here on the right. And of course, you have many other non-target elements besides this duck. The adult version that goes from the age of 13 onwards, so we have norms until the age of 70. You have to react to this card of 3 hearts and ignore other cards. With some of them are very similar, like this one, for example, that has just a diamond on the right bottom side of the card. And whilst you do this relatively simple task, there's a lot of distractors, visual and auditory distractors, that are supposed to interfere this relatively simple task in order to mimic and simulate the real life that happens, all over us. So for example, when we talk about the adult version, there's like a car that's about to hit you, there's a couple arguing, there's a wine that is pouring into a glass, things that are happening, not necessarily positive things, by the way. No, some of the distractors that we have there are quite negative in a way. So for example, we have a hand holding a cigarette. And many clinicians ask us, why did you put such negative elements, distractors in your test? And the answer is that we've tried more than 30 different versions of the test with different distractors. We did a lot of research in the literature about what actually helps distract examinees. And we found out that the use of negative distractors in parallel to other distractors creates a very strong distraction effect. And in our clinical trials, we found that improved the ecological validity of the test significantly. So I want to show you how this looks. This is the kids version. So again, the target here is hyper. And every time we see it, we press the space bar once as fast as possible. Here we have a visual distractor. It always comes in the periphery, not in the center. So this is like a small Pikachu. You see, it's all from the world of children. And the auditory distractors that you hear now are also relatively timid. We don't want to scare off the children. And it runs for around 14.5 minutes, and they finish it well. Some of them even with a smile. So we don't want to make this test too engaging. It is a CPT after all. It needs to be boring, but we didn't want to make it boring to the point where children stop doing it. And we think we found the right pathway with this test. The adult version is a bit more extreme. I'll show it to you now. A lot of noises, a lot of things happening, but you have to understand that it builds up gradually. So what I'm going to show you now is the 7th stage out of 8 stages. It's the most extreme one. So you have 2 visual and 2 auditory distractors. It looks like this. This is the target element that you have to react to. So you can imagine it's quite difficult doing this test, but you have to understand that every person that is doing the test is always compared to norms. And a word about the norms, we have norms from many countries now, from Israel, Holland, Australia, United States, Hungary, Italy, and even from China. And I think the last update we did was 6 years ago into the system. So we keep on updating all the time, and we have a lot of norms now to update. So it's going to be another update probably next year. And every time we collect norms in countries, we always compare them, and we see that there's not a lot of difference, if at all, with one exception, and that's China. When we collected norms in China, we saw that there was a big difference in an index we call timing, which is a bit like response time, but we are measuring the response to the target element whilst it's on screen. And we saw that there was a big difference in China, meaning that they were slower than the rest of the population that we collected norms in. And after we investigated a bit more, we found out it's actually cultural based. It seems that the Chinese children were more interested in making sure they do not make any mistake. So they took their time, and they were slower intentionally, which is why their attention index was very good, but their timing was very, very low. So it only comes to show how important it is to collect local norms. You never know. And even though in most of the other countries, they were always the same. There are a few very important benefits from MOXO. I mentioned one of them is the distractors. We're the only CPT that has distractors, and that improves the ecological validity. But above that, it's also the only one that is gamified. You saw how it looks. So children and also adults, they find it more engaging and more 21st century, as opposed to other CPTs that are very boring to the point where people ask themselves how relevant it is for my deficiencies. And the other aspect is that it's the only online cloud-based system, and it was validated as such. And that means that as clinicians, you can use the system on every computer. You don't have to install anything. You don't have to download anything. You don't need special hardware for it. And in fact, because of COVID-19 now, most of the clinicians that are using MOXO are using it for patients at home. So granted that it is a bit compromising the setting. It's not the setting as it is in the clinic, but we are guiding the clinicians on how to make sure that the setting at home is as close as possible to the clinic, so that the reliability of the test is conserved. And in Israel now, I think more than 50% of all MOXO tests are being done online. And we have a huge interest from an application of it in other countries as well. More than 60% of all sales on MOXO are coming out of Israel at the moment. So the results of MOXO are presented in two different elements. The first one is a patient profile, where we compare the patient to a norm base. And the second one is a performance graph that looks at the various stages of the test and compares the patient based on these. So the patient is compared to himself based on his performance on base 1, which is the first stage of the test. So we want to see how he progressed throughout the test. The norm comparison is based on Z-scores, where 0 is the average. So 2 standard deviations, as you see here, is still considered to be within norm. The cutoff being minus 1.65, so any result that is lower than that is considered to be abnormal. And as you can see here in the table, the 4 indices that we measure are attentiveness, timeliness, impulsivity, and hyperreactivity. Out of the 4 indices in this example, the hyperreactivity is abnormal. Below that, we have a severity table, which shows how abnormal it is. The further you are, the more severe the result is. So in this case, hyperreactivity was abnormal, and it was very severe, 4. As a rule of thumb, the more reds you have, the more it is likely to be ADHD. And the more you have a combination of one of A and T, which is the ADD type or the ADHD inattentive type, and one from the impulsivity hyperreactivity, which is again based on the DSM-5 is the ADHD hyperactive impulsive type, So if you have one of these and one of these, the likelihood of it being ADHD is very high as well. But as you can imagine, CPT is a decision support tool. So as with other CPTs, it's always a part of the process. It is an important one because it's the only objective tool you have in the basket, but it's a part of the process. When we calculated the positive predictive value of MOXO, it's around 70%, which is extremely high. Negative predictive value of MOXO is around 99%, which makes it a huge tool also for screening. The performance graph looks like this. It looks at the various stages of the test, which you see here in the X, and you see here that basic 1 and basic 2 are on the extremes. So the first stage and the 8th stage are the same without any distractors. And that allows us to understand the sustained attention. And all the other stages throughout the test have various combinations of distractors. So the 2nd and 3rd have visual distractors and so forth, audio, and a combination. And that allows us to say a lot of very interesting things about patients. For example, we can see when auditory distractors can limit the or decrease attentiveness, or actually it could help attentiveness. So we see, for example, that some people work very good or they have a high level of attention when auditory distractors came into effect. And when we interview these people, it seems like for most of them, it actually correlates to real life in the way that they work with music or they study with music, and it actually helps them concentrate or be more attentive, to be more exact. This is I didn't want to go too depth into this because we can talk about it forever, but I do want to show you a quick example from one of our clinics in Israel, and it's about compensation mechanism and how to look at this graph. So, because what we see here is this orange line is hyperactivity, and this blue line is attentiveness. And what we see here is a very clear compensation mechanism where when the patient is having less of attention, so he has a reduction in attention, he becomes more tired, then he becomes more hyperactive, and that looks as a reduction, and that increases attention. So he uses hyperactivity to gain more attention. We know that as clinicians, but the point is that most teachers don't know that. And when the child starts fidgeting, starts moving, starts scribbling, etc., that's actually a strategy for that child to become more attentive. We see that very clearly in the graph. But the teachers, because they don't know that, they take away this tool from children, and they stop drilling, stop fidgeting, stop drilling, stop drawing, stuff like that. And they take away their tool. And we try to teach that based on objective results, that actually is taking away the one main tool for children to become more attentive. That's just an example of one of the nice things that you can see in these graphs. With regards to the validation of the test, we've done a few clinical trials already. There's always new ones that are being published. Just one in Turkey that was just now published. This one is for children, so 547 children, aged 7 to 12 in Israel and the Netherlands. And of course, the tool was very good at distinguishing children with ADHD and unaffected children. But I want to quickly show you this. This is the control group. So the 369 children that were in control group, all of them had a clinical interview, use of other tools to make sure that they don't have ADHD. It was very hard to find children who didn't have any ADHD or any other morbidity. So I think we drafted more than 700 children and only considered 369 for these. And out of this group, 51 children failed in the MOXO, which correlates to 86% specificity. You can see that when we look at these indices here, this is the combination of the different indices. You see that it's very rare for a false positive if you have a combination like this. Very rare, only one. On the flip side, 178 children were diagnosed with ADHD. Again, clinical interview, DSM questionnaire, Connors peer teacher questionnaire as well. And out of 178, which again was very difficult to find pure ADHD, as you know, comorbidity is a big thing here. So it was very difficult. I think more than 300 children were interviewed for this phase. 160 children were ADHD positive, which correlates to around 90% sensitivity. And these are very good values. There are also clinical trials for teenagers, so 13 to 18. This is 176 children. And this one is an interesting one that was just published recently, 486 adults, 18 to 65, you see multinational. It was actually a part of the study that looked into substance abuse disorder and the combination comorbidity of SUD with ADHD and ADHD alone. And it was a very interesting study. I urge you to read it. But the point that I wanted to make from here is the validity of the test for this age group as an ability to identify control groups versus ADHD groups. Generally speaking, we now work with more than 50 universities around the world. We have, if I'm not mistaken, 32 clinical research programs running at the moment, some in Spain as well. More than 500,000 tests have been sold and done around the world. We now work in 20-something countries, especially now with the COVID-19 and all the online cloud-based, home-based testing. It's been a real surge for us. We work with many healthcare professionals, many in Spain as well. And we're doing a lot of clinical research, as you can see here, and we have a lot of partners in this field as well. One of the things that really help us significantly shine in comparison to other CPTs, as I already mentioned, is the scalability of MOXO. So I mentioned the online cloud-based. Here I compare it to a number of other CPTs. And we are the only one who have a home version. We are the only one who doesn't need any specialized hardware. And the other point that I wanted to make is that it's also very user-friendly. You know, when you finish the MOXO, you don't have 8 or 9 pages of reporting, which may seem like that it says something about the test. In fact, we believe that all your time should be spent on other things rather than trying to interpret the results. So usually the report on MOXO is only 2 pages, very simple to understand, very simple to follow. We do a lot of training for physicians to make sure that they understand how to interpret the results without the need of a lot of pages. And this is one of the benefits that many clinicians love about our product. Finally, as I mentioned, the home version part of the MOXO is really popular these days. As you know, telehealth grew significantly, and waiting lists for professional healthcare providers, for especially mental health care, is surging. You know, every other psychologist that I speak to is saying that they have 3 to 4 months waiting list now. So the ability to prioritize patients, the ability to help them without them leaving their home is a huge benefit. And assuming that you help the patient conserve the setting, which it's really basic, just make sure that the room is secluded, that you have a stable internet connection, that there's no distractions, and they go to the bathroom before they do the test, is quite straightforward. The one thing that we mentioned here is about observation, which is very important. In the clinic, it's not a problem. The clinician is there, he can do the observation, and it's an important part of the test. At home, it's a bit more challenging. So the way we try to overcome that is 2 ways. First of all, we developed an observation form for parents to be able to fill in whilst the patient is doing the test. This is one way. The second way is to use another platform, so like a cell phone or smartphone at a 45% degree angle that overlooks the child as he's doing the test. So usually the combination of both makes for a very good observation, and it works very well with the patient, with the clinics that we work with. And finally, I want to introduce you to our team. We have a very dedicated and very passionate team in Israel, and we have a subsidiary in China that we created not long ago. Most of us come from the world of psychology. Most of us have a lot of experience with startups, and we're a very innovative team with a lot of very interesting ideas. From our advisory board, you probably know Professor Cesar Satuyo, who recently moved to Texas Medical Center. He was, if I'm not mistaken, from Navarra Hospital until recently. And he's been with our advisory board for quite a long time now. And Professor Sam Goldstein is a relatively new addition to our team, only about 2 years. And he's the chief editor of the Journal of Attentional Disorder, a neuropsychologist by training, and a very innovative person as well. And finally, Professor Gil Goldswig from Israel is the dean of the psychology department in Tel Aviv Yafo Academy. And just this, the last slide with my details. You're welcome to get in touch with me and my team. We're also represented in Spain by Neurotalentum, which are a great team of people, and they're happy to help and assist as much as possible. So thank you very much. And now it's your turn to ask me questions if you have any.
Thank you so much, Ohad, for your presentation, for accepting our invitation in these difficult times there in Israel. We really hope things get better there.
Thank you, and thank God that no missiles came at the time of the presentation, so you didn't have to
I think that
the shelter.
The presentation was the less problem, you know. So we really hope you're okay and things get better.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye. Have a nice day.